Hi everyone, this is Jason Zach from Nathaniel School of Music. In this tutorial, we are going to learn how to identify intervals from a theoretical and notation perspective and all the perhaps loopholes around this whole subject. We have done a lot of interval year training. So, in fact, that's what I've predominantly been doing on our channel. So, we leave you the year training intervals lessons. Also, year training, you can work out chords and other such things. I've not really done a staff notation video on our channel. It's more on our website under the video courses section. So this might end up being the first actually, which is why I have a pen and a book. Hopefully that works. Not a book, not a real book. Tablet book. Anyway, so what we are going to first look at is what are the types of intervals we have in music. First of all, you'll have to understand that an interval has a name as well as a number. So if you're looking at maybe a capital M would be for major, small m would be for minor, then you have your dim for diminished, you have your aug for augmented, and you have your P for perfect. So an interval will have a name and the number is purely alphabetical in nature to indicate the eventual note. So if you say some third from C, it's going to be some kind of E. So I repeat, some third from C would end up being some kind of E. So what are the kinds of E's out there? You would have your E, normally C to E. We call that a major third. Then you could have C to E flat, that's called as a minor third. Then you have C to E sharp. Now stay with me, we usually call that F. Actually, even I would prefer to call that F, but officially speaking, if you sharpen a major third, you're going to get an augmented third. Okay, so just remember that. So if you have major of something, well, major can either be, major is dedicated to either the second, the third, the sixth, and the seventh. And the minors are also dedicated to 2, 3, 6, 7. Perfects are dedicated to either the 4 or the 5. However, we could even say things like perfect unison and augmented unison, but I'd leave that aside for now. Diminished generally can be assigned to anything, either major or minor. But the logic here is if you take any major interval and if you raise it by one step, that means if you sharpen it, and if you retain the alphabet, so C, E, I'm raising E up the alphabet. Theoretically, you have to call that as an augmented third or augmented something. So major third becomes an augmented third. It could also be looked at as a perfect fourth, but the theory behind it is that. And if you flatten a major, your flattening means lowering by one. So you have C to E, you lower it by one, you'll get your E flat, and that's your minor interval. And if you further lower a minor, if you further lower that by one step, that's an opportunity to get a diminished interval. Diminished, I think I spelled it right. Anyway, so if you take the entire ecosystem, C's major third is E, C's minor third is E flat, C's diminished third would be, well, it looks like D, but officially we have to say E double flat, E flat flat. So it'll have to be E double flat, that's a diminished third, and then you have your augmented third. Okay, that'll be E sharp. So if we have to notate this in the sheet or in staff, so C and then it's E, this would be a major third. Then if you take C to E flat, that would be a minor third. Then if you take C to E flat flat, which is nothing but D, we call that a diminished third. And finally, last but not least, if you take E to C to E sharp, that would be an augmented third. When you notate things, you have to write the sharp and the flat before the alphabet, but when you write things, you write it later. In fact, we even say F sharp, but when we notate it, it'll have to be written as sharp F and so on. Okay, so let me just write the names of that. C to E would be a major third, C to E flat would be a minor third, C to E flat flat would be a diminished third, and C to E sharp would be an augmented third. So just like this, you can form this for any of the intervals. And what are the majors again? You can have major second, major third, major sixth, as well as major seventh. So let me try and revise that for another root, or with using another root. So let's use the root F, which is this, and let's take the interval case study of the second. Okay, so first off, I'm going to write down F, and what will be F's major second? It would be G. 2 steps from anywhere. What will be F's minor second? F to G flat. So even though some of you might acknowledge that G flat is also F sharp, if you want to call something a minor second, you'll have to write it as G flat. And I'm telling you this from a theoretical perspective. Okay, F to G would be a major 2, and remember, major always to be written with capital M, minor to be always written with small m. So make sure your capital and small handwriting is decent enough. I sometimes fail. Do you have a diminished second? Well, obviously not, because a diminished second comes back to the root. So some diminished intervals are not even needed, but you could have an F to a G sharp, which is an augmented second. Now you might be thinking, why do I need to remember or mug up all this stuff? The strange answer I found playing music for a few years now is my own country, India. Because if you take our Carnatic ragas or Hindustani ragas, actually Carnatic ragas in particular, there are too many of them. And the Melakarta ragas or the basic ragas itself add up to 72. That's a lot of permutations. So the way they build it would be, if you take a C, this is sa re ga ma pa. That's literally one of the permutations just to get from sa to pa. And sa and pa we can retain. So sa pa. Okay. But the seconds could change. So they have sa re ga ma pa ma ga re sa. You could also do sa re ga ma pa ma ga re sa. So that's where you have engaged a minor second. Very Arabic in nature, but you could also now engage the augmented second. Sa re ga ma pa ma ga re sa, sa re ga ma pa ma ga re sa. So this could form a fair amount of ragas. And if you now couple that with the two mas, the normal ma, shuddh as they say, or the tivra ma, the sharp, now that also has a name. So the way fourths work, C to F would be called as a perfect fourth, because it's in almost all the scales. I don't know why they actually use the word perfect. You can let me know in the comments. But the theory behind it is you should write it with a small p, capital P not allowed, perfect fourth. And what happens with the perfect interval is pretty simple compared to the major minor ecosystem. So you, as always, you can sharpen a perfect and you can flatten a perfect. Sharpening means going up a step and flattening means going down. So if you sharpen a perfect, you will get the augmented interval, and if you flatten, you're going to directly get the diminished interval. So in Carnatic music, or while building ragas, that would be a perfect 4, that would be an augmented 4. Yes, we also call it a tritone in some cultures. Perfect, tritone. There we have it. So C to F would be a perfect 4, but C to F sharp would end up being a augmented fourth. Okay, so coming back to that raga explanation, so you could have your flat 2 or minor 2, you could have your normal major 2, you could have your augmented 2, but then that coupled with the mas, you'll have so many permutations, right? Sa re ga ma pa ma ga re sa, sa re ga ma pa ma ga re sa, sa re ga ma pa ma ga re sa. That's the third, that's the 2 sharp. But now coupled with the tivra ma or the sharp 4, sa re ga ma pa ma ga re sa, that's with the flat 2. Re ga ma pa ma ga re sa, very Lydian or Yaman like. Then don't even know this scale. Sounds pretty cool. Sa re ga ma pa ma ga re sa. So to distinguish between the intervals, the seconds could be 3 in number. You could have, well, everything could be a lot of them. So you could have a minor 2, you could have a major 2, you could have an augmented 2. In terms of thirds, however, you don't have an augmented third. We don't consider that in either music, Western or Eastern or Indian. Instead, with thirds, you're going to have a major third, a minor third, and in some rare cases, a diminished third, which will be D. That I showed you earlier. And the sevenths are named exactly like the thirds in the same system. So you have C, B, major seventh, drop it down, you get a minor seventh, and then you have a diminished seventh, which is in Western music is useful for building the diminished chord, or more specifically the diminished seventh chord. That one. So you have to call it different things. In some cases it could be called a major sixth, in some cases it could be called a diminished seventh. So let's look at some of the same pitches that might confuse you. Major second, in some of the rarest of the rare cases, could also be called as a diminished third. Very, very rare. Okay. You'll have your augmented fourth, which people could also call as a diminished fifth. That exists. But then you could also simplify your process by saying the word tritone. That could also work. Then what else? You could have the sixth. The sixth has a lot of options. So you could say augmented 5 is equal to or equivalent to, if that's the right word, to a minor sixth, because a sharp 5 is a flat 6, right? And then you could say this one, a major sixth could be equivalent to a diminished seventh in some of the rare cases. Are there any other equivalents? I doubt it. Major second, in some rare cases, diminished third. Tritone you'll have to change around, because in some cases, if you the logic also in Western music giving these intervals names, and also in Indian Carnatic music, is the reason we call it a second is because there has to be some kind of second in our scale, right? In the scale, the degrees are sa re ga ma pa da ni, or 1 2 3 4 5 6 7. So there has to be some kind of 2, unless of course it's a janya raga or a pentatonic scale, a subset scale as I call it. So, but for the most part, when you develop harmonic theory, when you build ragas, we generally tend to start with the 7-note system, or the tat as they call it in Hindustani. So it's good to respect the naming convention, because it will help you along the way. If for all these years you've acknowledged that something is G or something is B, you should also then acknowledge the way they named the interval between two notes, right? You've already got yourself into the system. So if you're a guitar player or a bass player, and if ever you call a scale G sharp major, that's technically wrong. You have to call it A flat major, because the way the theory works, it's built around the circle of fifths. A flat is in the flat department, right? I am digressing a bit from interval theory, which I'll come back to, but it's important to respect these names and try to just get used to them. But in some cases, I agree, it can get a bit geeky at times, where you have to write double sharps and double flats and whatnot. Okay, so coming back to our naming convention. So far in the piece, we have looked at the fact that majors could be 2 3 6 7, minors could be 2 3 6 7. You could have a diminished fifth, and you can have a diminished seventh. These are the ones I've used, or I find used. Then you could have an augmented second, I told you, where you raise the major second. You can have an augmented fourth. You can even have an augmented fifth, by the way, because that's used a lot in augmented scales, and to build some interesting modes as well. You could have a scale built with the sharp 4 as well as the sharp 5. Lydian augmented, you could say. Nice scale actually. And then the perfect would generally be 4 5, but in some cases they might even dedicate it to say perfect octave, perfect unison. So I've just put it out there, and I need to make a point clear in this theory lesson. These are intervals within the octave. Beyond the octave, we have words like 9, 11, 13. So let me know in the comments if you want me to cover a more advanced interval lesson. I'll be happy to do a follow up. Let me know in the comments. That's important. Also, like the video while you're at it. Okay, so that was about thirds. Now let's look at different roots and play around. So let's now look at the root of F, or let's look at G, and let's look at fifths. Now, whenever you're populating intervals with staff notation, the trick I have is, if you want to, let me draw the trick in the previous one. Yeah, here you go. So you have G, the very next line, or F, or the very next space. This is going to end up being some kind of third, visual thirds, if you want to call it that, space to space third. Okay, and remember alphabetical third, that is very important. Alphabetical third means G's third is B, because English G A B, B's third is D, B C D. Why English? So remember your thirds very well alphabetically, then you'll get by pretty efficiently. Coming to fourths, what's going to happen? Actually, let me finish fifths. So if you take fifths, you skip one. As you can see, I'm skipping a line in order to go from G to D, and I'm skipping a space in order to go from F to C. So that's your fifth. So thirds, fifths, sevenths, maybe even the ninths as it goes forward will be built like that. Third, you don't skip a line. Fifth, you skip one. Seventh, you skip two. And then ninth, you skip three. Okay. And then when it comes to the other ecosystem, you can do 2, 4, 6, 8, which is nothing but the octave. What do I mean by that? What is a second from this note? E. It'll be F. What will be a fourth? It'll be the space. Line becomes the space. And then the sixth. E is sixth. First of all, alphabetically, if you count it, E, F, G, A, B, C. Some kind of C, right? So there we have all the intervals notated, and you can easily visualize it. But now the problem is what sixth to call it, what third to call it, what fourth. There we go back to our names. And I'm just going to revise, recap, and look at a few challenges along the way. Let's look at all the fifths with respect to G. So you have your G. Again, to get the fifth, G to D. Right? But if this G was in fact G flat, G flat is also F sharp, then G flat's fifth will still be some kind of D, but it will be D flat. Okay? And well, what if this was G sharp? G sharp is also A flat. Then you'll have to write D sharp. So that's the first plan. It's G to D always. But then whether you write sharp or flat depends on the interval. In all of these cases, I have ended up forming a perfect fifth. Now, what are the other fifths out there? Let's try and do diminished fifth. So diminished fifth from G will be still some kind of D, but what did I tell you earlier? Perfect comes down by 1, so D flat. Then let's do an augmented fifth from G. Again, some kind of D, but you raise it, becomes D sharp. And then the same ecosystem would happen even for perhaps a G flat. So G flat to D would end up being an augmented fifth, because that's perfect. That's augment. What if we want to do a diminished fifth? Then from G flat, then theoretically you'll have to end up doing, which annoys me sometimes, you'll have D flat, which is perfect. Then you come to a C, that's your tritone, but you'll have to call it D double flat. So this is some of the geeky but important stuff, especially if you want to do a music theory exam somewhere, or in general if you're orchestrating, if you're notating music, and you shouldn't be surprised by all these things. It's how the system has been coded. Okay, so we've looked at what are all these things now. This would be the augmented, aug 5, and this would be the dim 5, right? From there. And then in the other setup, again, I've done G to D flat, which is dim 5, and G to D sharp, which is aug 5. So if I've showed you for the fifths, all you need to remember is that chart. If it's major, you flatten it, it becomes minor. You flatten again, sometimes in rare cases, it becomes diminished. You sharpen major, it becomes augmented in some rare cases. What about perfect? You sharpen it, it becomes augmented. You flatten it, it becomes diminished. That's about it. These are the intervals, and the numbers assigned to them are 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then you have your unison, which is just the same distance, root to root, and you have the octave, which is 1 to 8. Notation wise, I've told you how you can visualize it. I hope that helps. And you might want to handwrite a lot of this stuff. Don't buy too many charts and invest in too much of things that you print out and stick in your room. It's always a good practice to handwrite. In this case, however, I'm writing it on a tablet. I don't recommend that to everyone out there, but in my case, it's just something I can share with you faster. Ideally, even if you have a book, try to use a blank notebook. I don't recommend manuscript books, to be completely honest, because manuscript books set the width of the line. The line's distance between them is set. So you'll be actually wasting money if you don't like that kind of writing. Maybe you want the lines to be wider apart, or maybe you want it narrower, up to you. So write your own lines, and thus spaces will be created. Get a ruler, get a geometry kit, and see how it all goes. Right, guys? So in this tutorial, I've told you how to read your intervals and also the theory behind intervals. I know this lesson should have happened a lot earlier, but I'm more fascinated with the ear training side of things. So I've ended up doing a lot of ear training lessons in intervals and chords and harmonic ear training, forgetting to deal with the actual theory behind it. So this lesson was an explainer, not just the theory, but also how you write it down and put it in the notation sheets. Thanks a ton for watching the lesson. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, turn on the bell icon for regular notifications, and my handwritten notes for this entire lesson and everything else from the past and future are waiting for you on Patreon just for a monthly subscription of $5 a month. Thanks a ton. Cheers.